In this presentation here, I'm going to go over some Greek, and ideally it would be enough Greek that at the end of the lesson we're going to go through Luke 8, 4 through 8. It won't actually be enough to fully understand the text, but you will be able to partially understand the text, and especially if you were to listen to it more times or look up a couple of the things I don't cover, that would help. But just a little bit about, so this is going to be Koine Greek or Koine Greek, and I'm going to use modern pronunciation. I'm not going to give a defense of that right now because that's not the purpose of this video, but I will say that I originally learned Greek with the Erasmian pronunciation, so my modern pronunciation won't be perfect. I may accidentally let some Erasmian things slip in from time to time. It's not the end of the world. So I'm gonna try to talk about what's happening in English, but keep the actual content in Greek. So as we notice these images here, you have an image on the left and you have an image on the right. And I want you to really focus on the image and think about the concepts, think about what you're seeing instead of just trying to come up with a word. Try not to just translate from between an English word and a Greek word. Try to actually think about the concepts. Okay, so on the left there, we have o one year, and then on the right we have iyini. And then once again, another photo. On the left we have o one year, and on the right we have iyini. Here's another image. You'll see someone standing there, standing in a field, looking off into the distance, maybe at the sunset or sunrise. O one year. Ospiron. O one year. Ospiron. Now look at these four images and try to think about what they have in common, what kind of descriptions you might use for these images, and then of the little bit of vocabulary we covered so far, what words might be relevant to these images. And in any of these things, if you happen to be able to relate something to a personal experience, that's also really good for learning words, learning vocabulary. O one year, ergazete. So look at all these four images here. O one year, ergazete. Okay, here's the man again. He's standing here once again in a field. He's dropping something. I believe they're seeds into the field. And there is a bird flying in the background. Maybe something on the mountains back there. Maybe that's people. Ospiron ergazete. Ospiron ergazete. O one year ergazete. O one year ergazete. And here's another image of an object. Osporos. Once again, the image of the man standing there, dropping seeds. Ospiron spiri sporon. Ospiron spiri sporon. O one year spiri sporon. Ospiron ergazete. O one year ergazete. All right, and now we have this other image here, and you'll see there's something going on in the image, some action here, and we did cover already a vocabulary word that's relevant to this, and then there's a new vocabulary word as well. Iyini, that might be familiar. That's a word that I went over briefly. Iini pipti. So once again, iini pipti. Here's another image that kind of relates to the previous image. And you'll see we can use some vocabulary words to describe the action that's happening here. I think that poor fellow is about to hit the pavement and get hurt, and you can see some interesting buildings in the background. Oanir. And what's he doing? Oanir pipti. All right, another thing, an object. We spoke about this object, and it's doing something. We've also covered the action that is happening in this picture. Osporos. Osporos pipti. All right, and here you see 3 different images that are all representing the same thing. And in these images, they're kind of there's kind of a commonality between these 3 images. Iodos. So that's going to be an important word for us in the passage. Iodos. Maybe you can think of a time that you've been on one of these, right? Iodos. Now there are 3 different images here, and actually these images are not connected. They're 3 separate images. I just didn't want to make 3 separate slides. So on the left hand side, what is that fuzzy little guy? Topetinon. Topetinon. And in the middle, Ipetra. Ipetra. And then on the right hand side, Okarpos. Okarpos. Ipetra might sound a little bit familiar because the name Peter is based off of that word. Now here you'll see 5 separate images, and with these images I'm trying to represent just 2 concepts. There's a top half and a bottom half. Ouranos. Iyi. Ouranos. Iyi. Now we're going to go through some images that just manipulate the vocabulary that we've already learned. So maybe look at the image briefly and try to figure out what you think is happening in that image. O karpos pipti epitim petron. O karpos pipti epitim petron. And another one, again, see if you can try to guess what's in that image and maybe come up with whatever vocabulary you can remember from what we've covered so far. If you think you can put it together into a phrase or a sentence, that's also good. Or otherwise, just remembering the vocabulary is also fine without doing any conjugating. I Petra pipti epi ton karpon. I Petra pipti epi ton karpon. Now we have another image. O karpos pipti epitinin. O karpos pipti epitinin. O sporos pipti epitinodon. O sporos pipti epitinodon. And here's a new image, and this one would, there's some vocabulary that we would know from this image. To petinon petati en to reno. To petinon petati and to urano. All right, and in these two images, there is a contrast between them. I wanted to highlight the contrast about what's different between these two images and how the situation is different between the two images. Oanir echi petran. On the left-hand side, you'll see Oanir echi petran. But on the right-hand side, something is different. Oanir uk echi petran. Oanir uk echi petran. So on the left, Oanir echi petran. On the right, Oanir uk echi petran. And then another way those can be put together, which there's a grammatical thing here that would be relevant for Luke, which is why I'm showing it this way. The phrase at the bottom on the right hand side, that's a question mark in Greek, so this is a question. Echitin petran I mi echintin petran. So as we would describe on the left hand side, echintin petran I, and what we have on the right hand side, mi echintin petran. Now here's two more images here, and in this one you kind of notice the pictures are the same, and that's because in this one I'm actually trying to show two synonyms. To dendron episin karpon. To dendron episin karpon on the left hand side, and on the right hand side, to dendron feri karpon. To dendron feri karpon. To dendron episin karpon. To dendron feri karpon. Now, on the left hand side, we have this image here. I ampeles fi karpon. That verb is the same as we had in our the last example sentence. I ampeles fi karpon. And on the right hand side, once again, that's the same verb, it's just conjugated. It starts with a f sound. Ta anti fiusin en to agro. So here's two more images where, again, I'm going to try to express another concept. Technically, the translation is not what you would initially assume that it is, but you'll get kind of the rough idea, I think, just from the pictures. So on the left-hand side, ikmas. On the left-hand side, we have ikmas. And then on the right-hand side, ikmas estin epitisis. Ikmas estin epitisis. Again, two more images that are going to be expressing this same concept. Osporos echi ikmada. So on the left-hand side, there's something different between the left and the right. On the left-hand side, we see that osporos echi ikmada. But on the right-hand side, osporos uk echi ikmada. Osporos uk echi ikmada. So here's two more images that are kind of expressing a related concept. Osporos exiranti oti uk echi ikmada. Osporos exiranti oti uk echi ikmada. So oti I didn't cover, and that kind of will probably be easier with just a translation. It means because. So osporos exiranti, that's the situation, the reason why. Oti uk echi ikmada. Now for the image on the right. To antos exiranti oti uk echi ikmada. So the object there was a word that I didn't really cover very much, but the object is to antos, and then what it's doing in the image, exiranti, and the reason why, oti uk echi ikmada. All right, another image here that expresses an important concept. Iakanta. Iakanta. These two images are supposed to be contrasting to one another. There's a contrast between these two images. So on the left-hand side, O agathos anir, O agathos anir. But on the right-hand side, O kakos anir, O kakos anir. Once again, two objects we're going to be contrasting with the same vocabulary from the last slide. O agathos karpos versus O kakos karpos. O agathos karpos, O kakos karpos. And the object is O karpos. All right, so now I'm going to read through the passage, but just kind of relax, try to pick out what you can. We didn't actually cover everything, and then we're actually going to go over it in a little more detail afterwards. So just try to recognize what words you can, okay. Siniondos theochlupolu keton katapolin epiperefamenon prosafton ipen diapervalis. Exilthen o spiron tu spiriton sporon avtu, ke ento spirin avton, omen episen paratinodon, ke katapetiti, ke ta epetina tu ranu katefayen avto, ke etran katepisen epitin petran, ke fien exiranti diatomiechin ikmada, ke etran episen en meso ton akanton, ke simfiise eakante apepnixan avto, que etran episen istin intinacatin, que fien episen carpon, ecatanta plasiana, taftalego nefoni, o echon ota acuin acueto. All right, so once again, we've only gone through enough Greek to, as you read the passage, it would be like looking through a frosted window where you can kind of see through it, but not really. You can't quite tell what you're looking at. That's the kind of understanding that we could have at this point, because there's a lot of things I didn't go over that would be necessary for this passage, and that's fine. So now as we go through these lines here, some of the lines we're going to dig a little deeper into, and some of them we're not going to. The first and the last line, we actually didn't cover any of the relevant vocabulary. This is one of them, so if you don't understand anything from it, that's fine. Just enjoy the picture, I guess, as I read it. Seniondos theochlupolu keton katapolin epiperefamenon prosafton ipen dia pervalis. So pervalis, maybe that word's familiar because it's parables. All right, now on this one, we do know some of the vocabulary. I'll read through it, then we'll kind of build up a reminder of what we learned, and then I'll read through it again. So, exilthen o spiron tu spiriton sporon avtu. And you're like, what does that mean? Well, let's look at some kind of relevant, simpler sentences. O anir espirenton sporon. So some of those words we had. And it's a very related sentence. O spiron espirenton sporon. Okay, and then in the next one, exilthen. We didn't cover that word. O spiron tu spire ton sporon avtu. So just from what we covered, you could kind of have an idea of what the sentence would be about without actually understanding the sentence, and that's fine. All right, so the same thing on this passage here. Ke ento spirin avton omen episen paratinodon ke katapatiti. And let's kind of look at a related sentence that's simpler, that has some of the same parts but is easier to understand. Osporos episen epitinodon. That's the core idea from the more complicated sentence. Osporos episen epitinodon. It's what you see in the picture as well. Now the longer sentence. Ke endospirin afton omen episen paratinodon ke katapetithi. Once again, it's basically going to be the same idea in all of these. Ke tapetina turanu katefeyen afto. I did not cover katefeyen, but you can kind of see from the picture, based on the other words that we know. We knew tapetina turanu. Those are both words that we had. Tapetina katefeyen ton sporon. That's a simpler sentence with mostly vocabulary except for the verb, which you can kind of probably tell from the picture what they're doing. So, ke tapetina turanu katefeyen afto. Ke eteran katepisen epitin petran. Osporos episen epitin petran. Simpler version with basically the same meaning. Ke eteran katepisen epitin petran. Ke fien exiranti diatomiechin ikmata. Osporos uk echi ikmata. So there's a lot of difference there between the two sentences, but we did cover those words on the bottom, and it's kind of the same idea that the top is trying to get across. So once again, the simpler version, Osporos uk echi ikmata, and the complicated version that Luke used. Ke fien exiranti diatomiechin ikmata. Ke eteran episen en mesoton akanton. Unfortunately, I just kind of skipped pretty much all the vocabulary you would need for this sentence. It just to try to not make the video last forever. But ke eteran episen en mesoton akanton. Ke simfiise e akante apepnixan afto. And I'll read it one more time. Again, we really didn't cover this vocabulary. Ke simfiise e akante apepnixan afto. All right, and now we've hit the climax of the parable, and we did cover enough vocabulary here, I think, to get the main point, or at least to have a kind of an idea of what's going on. Ke eteran episen istinin tinagatin, ke fien episen karpon ekatanta plasiana. Now some simpler sentences that are related. Osporos episen istinin. That would be a sentence that we could probably understand from the stuff that was covered earlier. Osporos episen istinin. And some of that same vocabulary is used in a more complicated sentence. Osporos episen karpon. And that we also covered enough vocabulary that you could probably understand that version. And again, the image should help as well. Osporos episen karpon. And the full more difficult sentence from Luke. Ke eteran episen istinin tinagatin, ke fien episen karpon ekatanta plasiana. And the final sentence from the passage, which again, we didn't cover any of this vocabulary. So, taftaleun ephoni oechon ota akuin akueto.